Hi, my name is Victoria Hertenstein, and this is my VRA for a math estimation word problem lesson that I taught in a fourth grade class at Elkton Elementary School. This VRA is differentiation. The first way I incorporated differentiation into my lesson was having tiered worksheets for my students during their independent practice. This is product readiness. My CT and I discussed beforehand that we would memorize who we were handing out worksheets to so that students did not know that they were getting different worksheets. The questions were the same, however, the numbers were smaller on one worksheet. As you can see, the word problems are the exact same between the two. This word problem worksheet has smaller numbers that 6 students received. This worksheet has the exact same amount of problems with the exact same problems, however, they have higher numbers that the rest of the class received. I think a benefit of this was that the students that received the worksheet with smaller numbers did not have to worry so much about solving the problems as much as understanding the concept of estimating. A downfall to using the two different worksheets was that as I and my CT were walking around discussing the work with the students, we were having to remember answer to two very similar worksheets at the same time, which got to be a bit confusing at times. After passing out the worksheets to the students, I shared that they could work out their problems using a dry erase board and dry erase marker or with pencil and paper. Each student was still asked to have their work checked before erasing and moving on to the next problem, but they were allowed to choose which way of writing out their work best suited them. This is process learner profile. I chose to do this because through my observations of the class, I noticed that some of them love to use their dry erase boards, while other students will purposely use pen and paper when they are asked to use their dry erase boards. There are a few examples of students who chose to use their dry erase markers to work out the problems on their worksheet. I noticed that many of the students chose to use dry erase markers while working on the worksheet, but as pictured here, students chose to use pencil and paper instead for their exit ticket. The majority of students chose pencil and paper instead of dry erase markers for their exit tickets, which I found interesting. A benefit of allowing the students to choose which way they wanted to work out their problems was that they were eager to start working. There were a few downsides to giving students this choice. One of the downsides was that the students who used the dry erase boards were quick to erase their work. This meant that my CT and I couldn't always see how a student had worked out their problem. A downside to using pencil and paper was that the students press down really hard when they write. Often, when they were trying to erase and fix part of their problem, their paper got extremely messy and became confusing to them because you could still see what they had erased. The third way I incorporated differentiation into my lesson was by allowing the students to work on their IXL choice board if they had completed their work early. My CT and I had discussed earlier, and we talked about the idea of me having them work on a specific IXL skill that tied into the lesson I had taught, but we both agreed the students would be less motivated to do math if we chose the skill for them. Another issue was that some of the students had already completed that skill on IXL. A benefit of allowing the students to choose which skill they want to work on in IXL is that they were eager to do math. The students have been spending all of this past week reviewing for their math SOL. IXL allows them to review for it. Pictured here is part of the student's choice board. You can see that each section students would complete and they had to get a 90 or above as a score before they got it signed off by another teacher. I think that a con to using IXL and allowing the students to choose which skill they were working on is that the skills they were working on were likely not related to the lesson that I had taught, so it did not add any extra practice for the lesson. Overall, I had student participation throughout some of my lesson, but wished that I had been able to get more student participation. I also feel as though the choices I made for differentiation worked well for the most part, with some minor kinks. Some of my biggest takeaways from this lesson is that I need to get some more student participation throughout my future lessons. And I also realized that it could have been more effective to have more problems to work through with my students before allowing them to work on independent practice. I think that the exit ticket was super helpful in gauging what my students had learned, and I also think that the students loved going through the first 10 problems and looking for keywords with me before starting.